The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in September of 1882, carried by a man whose horse looked ready to collapse, and Violet Harper knew before her father even opened it that her life was about to change in ways she could not imagine. She stood in the doorway of their ramshackle cabin, watching her father's weathered hands shake as he read the words on the expensive paper. The morning sun illuminated every crack in the walls, every patch on her faded dress, every sign of the poverty that had followed them like a shadow since her mother's death 3 years ago. Her father, Samuel Harper, had once been a prosperous merchant in Philadelphia, but bad investments and worse luck had brought them west to Snake River, Idaho, where they had barely scraped by ever since. "They want you married," her father said finally, his voice hollow. He looked up at her with eyes full of shame and something that might have been hope. "The Landry family. Xavier Landry specifically. He is looking for a wife, and they have agreed to pay off all our debts if you will consent to the arrangement." Violet felt her breath catch in her throat. Xavier Landry was a name whispered about in town with equal parts respect and fear. He owned the largest cattle ranch in the territory, thousands of acres that stretched as far as the eye could see. He was known as a fair but tough man, someone who had built his empire from nothing but grit and determination. She had never seen him up close, only glimpses of him riding through town on his black stallion, tall and imposing in his dust-covered clothes. "Why would he want me?" Violet asked quietly. She knew what she was, the poorest girl in Snake River, wearing dresses that had been mended so many times they were more thread than fabric. Her hands were rough from washing other people's laundry, her face sun-weathered from working in the garden that barely produced enough vegetables to keep them fed. Surely he could have anyone. Her father's face crumpled. His sisters arranged it, according to Mrs. Chen at the general store. They sent him several prospects, all wealthy daughters of businessmen from back east. He refused them all. They think that if they send someone he cannot possibly want, someone so far beneath his station, he will finally give up his stubborn independence and accept one of their other choices. The truth settled over Violet like a cold blanket. She was not being offered an opportunity. She was being used as a tool, a pawn in a family's manipulation. They expected Xavier Landry to take one look at her shabby appearance and send her away, thus proving to his sisters that he needed their help in finding a suitable bride. And yet, if she refused, her father would lose everything. The debts would crush him, and they would end up on the streets with winter coming fast. "What did you tell them?" she asked. "I said I would ask you," her father replied, and she heard the desperation in his voice. "Violet, I would never force you into anything, you know that. But if you do not go, we will lose the cabin by the end of the month. I have nothing left to sell, nothing left to trade. I am so sorry, my dear girl. I have failed you in every way a father can fail a daughter." Violet walked to him and took his trembling hands in hers. Despite everything, despite the poverty and the hunger and the endless struggle, he had always been kind to her. He had taught her to read and write when other fathers would have put their daughters to work with no education. He had never raised his hand to her, never blamed her for being born a girl instead of the son who might have helped him rebuild their fortunes. "I will go," she said firmly. "I will meet him, and if he will have me, I will marry him." Her father's eyes filled with tears. "You are worth more than gold, Violet, more than all the riches in the world. I pray he sees that." But Violet did not share his optimism. She spent the next 2 days preparing as best she could. She washed and mended her best dress, which was still clearly the dress of a poor woman. She borrowed a ribbon from Mrs. Chen, who took pity on her and refused payment. She scrubbed her hands until they were raw, trying to remove the permanent stains from years of hard work, but the calluses remained, testament to a life of labor. On Thursday morning, a carriage arrived. It was finer than anything Violet had ever ridden in, polished wood and brass fittings that gleamed in the sunlight. The driver, a stoic man named James, helped her inside without comment, though she saw his eyes take in her appearance with neither approval nor disdain, just acknowledgement. The ride to the Landry Ranch took 2 hours, winding through golden hills dotted with cattle and horses. Violet watched through the window, amazed at the sheer size of the operation. She saw cowboys working the herds, their shouts carrying on the wind. She saw fences that seemed to stretch forever, corrals full of horses being broken and trained. This was a kingdom built on cattle and land, and Xavier Landry was its undisputed ruler. The main house came into view, and Violet felt her courage waver. It was enormous, a 2-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch that wrapped around the entire building. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys, and she could see curtains in the windows, signs of a home that was lived in and cared for. It was more house than she had seen in years, a monument to success and wealth that made her feel smaller than ever. James helped her down from the carriage, and she stood in the yard, clutching her small bag of belongings. A woman emerged from the house, dressed in elegant traveling clothes that marked her as someone from back east. She was beautiful in a severe way, with dark hair pulled back in an elaborate style and eyes that assessed Violet with barely concealed satisfaction. "You must be Miss Harper," the woman said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I am Catherine Landry, Xavier's older sister. How kind of you to come all this way." Violet knew condescension when she heard it, but she held her head high. "Thank you for inviting me, Miss Landry." Catherine's smile was sharp. "Oh, it is Mrs. Pemberton now. I married quite well, you see. But please, come inside. My brother is out with the cattle, but he should return by this evening. You can wait in the kitchen. I am sure you will be comfortable there." The insult was clear. Not the parlor where a proper guest would wait, but the kitchen, where servants belonged. Violet followed Mrs. Pemberton into the house, taking in the polished wood floors, the sturdy furniture, the paintings on the walls. Everything spoke of money and taste, of a life so far removed from her own that it might as well have been on another continent. The kitchen was large and warm, with a massive stove and a long table where ranch hands likely took their meals. A woman stood at the counter, kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. She looked up when they entered, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "Rosa, this is Miss Harper," Mrs. Pemberton said with exaggerated patience. "She will be waiting here for Xavier. Please make sure she has water. I am sure she is thirsty after her journey." Rosa's eyes narrowed slightly, taking in the situation with understanding born of years. "Of course, Mrs. Pemberton. I will take good care of her." After Catherine left, her footsteps clicking away on the wooden floors, Rosa poured Violet a glass of cool water and set out a plate of fresh bread and butter. "Eat, child. You look like you have not had a proper meal in weeks." Violet wanted to protest, but her stomach betrayed her with a low rumble. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, saving what little food they had for her father. She took the bread with shaking hands and ate slowly, trying to maintain some dignity even as the delicious food made her want to weep. "They sent you here thinking he would refuse, did they not?" Rosa asked gently, sitting down across from Violet. "Those sisters of his have been trying to marry him off for years. Every woman they send is richer than the last, and he turns them all away." "Then why would he want me?" Violet asked, the question that had haunted her for days. "I have nothing to offer him. No money, no connections, no beauty. I am just a poor girl whose father cannot pay his debts." Rosa reached across the table and took Violet's rough hand in her own work-worn one. Maybe that is exactly what he needs. Someone real. Someone who knows what it is to work and struggle and survive. Xavier Landry built all this from nothing, you know. He came to Idaho with $50 and a dream, and he turned it into an empire. But he has never forgotten where he came from. Before Violet could respond, the sound of horses and men's voices filled the yard. Rosa stood quickly, smoothing her apron. That will be him now. Go on, child. Meet him in the hallway. Do not let him think you are hiding in the kitchen. Violet stood on shaking legs, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She walked to the hallway just as the front door opened, and for the first time, she saw Xavier Landry up close. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders built from years of hard labor. His face was tanned and lined from sun and wind, handsome in a rugged way that had nothing to do with polish or refinement, and everything to do with strength and character. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long and curling at his collar, and his eyes were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over distant mountains. He wore dusty work clothes, chaps covered in dirt and hay, and he smelled of horses and leather and the open range. He stopped when he saw her, his hand still on the door, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. Violet saw his eyes travel over her mended dress, her worn shoes, her calloused hands clutched together in front of her. She waited for the dismissal, for the polite words that would send her back to her father and their inevitable ruin. Instead, Xavier Landry smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger than his 30 years. "You must be Miss Harper. Violet, is it not?" His voice was deep and warm, with none of the mockery she had heard in his sister's tone. Violet found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Yes, Mr. Landry, I am grateful for your invitation." "Xavier, please," he said, stepping fully into the hallway and closing the door behind him. "Mr. Landry was my father, and we did not get along well enough for me to want his name." He paused, studying her with an intensity that made her skin warm. "I will be honest with you, Miss Harper. My sisters have been trying to marry me off for 3 years now. They keep sending me women from wealthy families, women who look at this ranch and see dollar signs, who could not tell a heifer from a steer and would not care to learn. I have refused them all, much to my family's frustration." "I know," Violet said quietly. "Your sister told me I was expected to be another refusal. They sent me hoping you would reject me and finally accept one of their other choices." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes, anger perhaps, directed not at her but at the manipulation. "Did they?" "Well, my sisters have always underestimated me. They think because I work with cattle and horses that I am some kind of simple man who can be maneuvered like livestock." He took a step closer, and Violet caught the scent of sage and sunshine that clung to him. "Tell me true, Violet Harper. Why did you come here?" She could have lied, could have pretended at romantic notions or gentle persuasion, but something in his direct gaze demanded honesty. "My father owes more money than we can ever repay. Your family offered to clear his debts if I agreed to this arrangement. I came because I had no choice, and because I love my father enough to try and save him from ruin." Xavier nodded slowly, as if this answer pleased him. "At least you are honest about it. That is more than I can say for most." He glanced down at his dirty clothes and gave a rueful laugh. "I am a mess. Give me an hour to clean up and then we will talk properly. Rosa will take care of you until then." He started up the stairs, then paused and looked back at her. The expression on his face was unreadable, but there was something warm in his eyes that made Violet's breath catch. "For what it is worth, Miss Harper, I think my sisters made a terrible miscalculation. I have seen plenty of fine ladies in fancy dresses, and not one of them looked at me the way you just did." "And how is that?" Violet asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Xavier's smile returned, slow and genuine. Like I was a man, not a bank account. He disappeared up the stairs, leaving Violet standing in the hallway with her heart racing and her thoughts in chaos. Rosa appeared at her elbow, gently guiding her back to the kitchen. "See, I told you. That boy has more sense than his sisters give him credit for." The hour passed in a blur. Rosa fed her more food, real substantial food that filled the empty spaces inside her. She washed Violet's face and hands, tusking over the rough skin but saying nothing critical. She even produced a nicer dress, simple but clean and unmended, that fit Violet reasonably well. "This was mine when I was younger," Rosa explained. "Before age and good cooking made me rounder. It suits you better than that poor worn thing you arrived in." When Xavier returned, he was transformed. He wore clean trousers and a pressed white shirt, his hair still damp from washing, his face shaved smooth. He looked like a gentleman, but there was still something untamed about him, something that spoke of wide open spaces and freedom. He offered Violet his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. He led her out to the porch, where two chairs sat overlooking the vast expanse of his ranch. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air was cooling with the promise of autumn. Xavier gestured for her to sit, and he took the chair beside her, stretching his long legs out in front of him. "I should tell you about myself," he began, his voice thoughtful, "so you know what you would be getting into if you chose to stay. I was born in Missouri in 1852, the youngest of 4 children. My father was a banker who drank too much and gambled more. By the time I was 16, he had lost nearly everything. My sisters married well and moved east, but I wanted nothing to do with their world of social climbing and pretense. I took what little money I had saved from working odd jobs and headed west." He paused, gazing out at his land with evident pride. "I worked as a cowboy for 5 years, learning everything I could about cattle and ranching. I saved every penny, slept on the ground, ate beans and hardtack. In 1873, I bought my first 100 acres and 10 head of cattle. I built a one-room cabin with my own hands and worked dawn to dusk every single day. It was hard, Miss Harper, harder than anything I had ever done. There were times I thought I would fail, times I went to bed hungry because I was feeding the livestock instead of myself." "But you did not fail," Violet said softly, caught up in his story. "No, I did not. The cattle multiplied, I bought more land, hired good men to work with me. By 1878, I had built this house and established the largest ranch in the territory. I have 3,000 head of cattle now, 200 horses, and 72,000 acres of the best grazing land in Idaho." He turned to look at her, his gray-blue eyes serious. "I am telling you this not to brag, but so you understand who I am. I am not some gentleman rancher who inherited wealth and plays at being a cowboy. I built this with my own hands, and I am proud of that." "You should be," Violet said, meaning it. "What you have accomplished is remarkable." Xavier leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Now you tell me about yourself, not the things my sisters already know about your father's debts and your circumstances. Tell me who Violet Harper is." No one had ever asked her that question before. She took a breath, thinking about how to answer. "I was born in Philadelphia in 1864. My mother was a school teacher before she married, and she taught me to love learning. She used to read to me every night, poetry and stories and history. When I was 15, she died of influenza, and my father fell apart. He made bad business decisions, trusted the wrong people, and we lost everything. We came west thinking to start over, but luck has not been with us." "What do you love?" Xavier asked, his voice gentle. The question surprised her. "I love books, though I rarely have the chance to read them anymore. I love morning when the world is still quiet and the light is soft. I love the feeling of clean laundry dried in the sun, and the smell of bread baking, and the sound of rain on a roof. I love honest work, even when it is hard, because at least it means something." She paused, then added softly, "And I love my father despite everything. He tried his best." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the sky. When he finally spoke, his words were careful, measured. "My sisters sent you here thinking I would reject you because you are poor. They thought I had become the kind of man who values money and social standing above all else. They were wrong." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made Violet's breath catch. "I know what poverty looks like, Miss Harper. I know what it means to work until your hands bleed and still not have enough. I know the hunger that gnaws at your belly and the cold that seeps into your bones when you cannot afford proper firewood. And I know that surviving all that takes a strength that no amount of money can buy." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took one of her work-roughened hands in his. His own hands were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who still worked alongside his men despite his wealth. "You came here because you had no choice, because you love your father enough to sacrifice yourself for him. But I am going to give you a choice now. Stay here, marry me, and I will clear your father's debts as promised. I will provide for you, protect you, and treat you with respect. I will not pretend to offer you love, not yet, because that is something that must be earned and given freely. But I will promise you honesty, partnership, and a chance at a life better than the one you left behind." Violet felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. "Why, you could have anyone. Why would you choose me?" Xavier's smile was soft, almost sad. "Because you are real. Because you understand what it means to struggle and survive. Because when you look at me, you see a man, not a fortune. And because I think you are worth far more than my fool sisters could ever understand." He squeezed her hand gently. "They sent the poorest girl thinking I would refuse, but the truth is, Violet Harper, you are richer than gold. The wealth you carry is in your character, your strength, your honesty. That is worth more than all the dowries in the world." The tears spilled over then, running down Violet's cheeks. No one had ever spoken to her like this, had ever seen value in her beyond what she could provide in labor or service. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will give this a chance," Xavier replied. "Stay for a while, get to know me, let me get to know you. If after a month you decide you cannot bear to be my wife, I will send you home with enough money to clear your father's debts anyway and start fresh somewhere else. But if you find you can tolerate my company, if you think we might build something good together, then we will marry and make a life here on this ranch." Violet thought about her father, about the cold cabin and the empty cupboards, about the endless struggle that had defined her life for the past 3 years. She thought about the shame in her father's eyes when he had asked her to do this thing. And then she thought about the man sitting beside her, holding her hand like it was something precious, offering her not just rescue but respect. "I will stay," she said quietly. "I will give this a chance." The smile that broke across Xavier's face was like sunshine, bright and warm and genuine. He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and somehow perfect. "Thank you, Violet. I promise you will not regret it." They sat together on that porch until the stars came out, talking about small things and large ones, learning the rhythms of each other's voices. Xavier told her about the ranch, about the men who worked for him and the cattle drives he led every year to market. Violet told him about the books she loved, about her dreams of someday having a garden that produced more than just survival rations, about the little things that brought her joy even in hard times. When the night grew cold, Xavier walked her inside and showed her to a bedroom on the second floor. It was larger than the entire cabin she shared with her father, with a real bed covered in quilts, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a window that looked out over the ranch. Violet stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the luxury of it all. "This is yours for as long as you are here," Xavier said from behind her. "Rosa will help you with anything you need. Breakfast is at 6, but if you want to sleep late after your journey, no one will judge you for it." Violet turned to face him, this man who was still mostly a stranger but who had shown her more kindness in a few hours than she had received in years. "Thank you, Xavier, for everything," he nodded, his eyes warm. "Sleep well, Violet Harper. Tomorrow I will show you the ranch properly, and you can decide if you think you could make a life here." After he left, Violet sat on the edge of the bed, running her hands over the soft quilts. She thought about the strange turns life could take, how she had come here expecting rejection and humiliation, only to find something entirely different. She did not love Xavier Landry, not yet, but she could feel the possibility of it hovering in the air like morning mist, full of promise and potential. She washed in the basin, marveling at the clean water and soft towels, then changed into a nightgown Rosa had left folded on the bed. When she finally lay down, sinking into the soft mattress, she felt tears come again. But these were not tears of despair or fear. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of cautious hope that perhaps her life was about to change for the better. Somewhere in the house, she heard footsteps, the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Violet Harper fell asleep feeling safe. Morning came with golden light streaming through the window and the sound of roosters crowing in the yard. Violet woke slowly, disoriented by the softness of the bed and the unfamiliar room. For a moment she thought she must be dreaming, that she would open her eyes to find herself back in the cold cabin with its thin blankets and drafty walls. But the sunlight was real, and so was the comfort, and so was the memory of Xavier Landry's words from the night before. She dressed quickly in the borrowed dress, plaiting her long brown hair into a simple braid. When she made her way downstairs, following the sounds and smells of breakfast being prepared, she found Rosa already hard at work in the kitchen and Xavier sitting at the long table, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. He looked up when she entered, and his face lit up with a smile. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Violet admitted, taking the seat Rosa indicated across from him. "That bed is the most comfortable thing I have ever experienced." Xavier laughed, a deep, warm sound that seemed to fill the kitchen. "Wait until you have been sleeping on the ground for 2 weeks during a cattle drive. Then that bed will seem like heaven itself." Rosa set plates in front of them, piled high with eggs, bacon, fresh bread, and fried potatoes. Violet stared at the abundance, hardly knowing where to begin. Xavier noticed her hesitation and his expression softened. "Eat, Violet. There is plenty and you need to build up your strength. If you are going to live on a ranch, you will need the energy to keep up." She ate slowly at first, then with more confidence as her hunger overcame her self-consciousness. The food was delicious, seasoned perfectly and cooked with obvious care. Between bites, she watched Xavier, noticing the way he moved with easy confidence, the way he thanked Rosa for every dish she set down, the way he seemed completely at ease in this kitchen despite his wealth and status. "I thought we could ride out together this morning," Xavier said as they finished their meal. "I want to show you the ranch, help you understand what life here is really like. It is not all comfortable beds and good food, Violet. There is hard work and long days, animals that get sick or injured, weather that can turn deadly in a matter of hours. I want you to see it all before you make any decisions." Violet appreciated his honesty. "I would like that, though I should warn you I have not ridden a horse much. We could not afford to keep one." "Then I will teach you," Xavier said simply. "It is a necessary skill out here. Can you be ready in 20 minutes? Violet nodded, and Rosa produced a split riding skirt, more practical than the dress she wore. "This was mine too, back when I rode more," Rosa explained with a wink. "Xavier is right about needing to learn. You cannot live on a ranch without knowing how to handle a horse." 20 minutes later, Violet found herself standing in the stable, watching as Xavier saddled 2 horses with practiced efficiency. One was a large bay gelding that he introduced as Thunder, his regular mount. The other was a smaller chestnut mare with a gentle eye and a calm disposition. "This is Daisy," Xavier said, stroking the mare's neck. "She is as sweet as they come and perfect for learning. She will take care of you, I promise." He helped Violet mount, his hand steady on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. The height was dizzying at first, and Violet gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles. Xavier swung up onto Thunder with easy grace, bringing his horse alongside hers. "Relax," he said gently. "The horse can feel your tension and it makes her nervous too. Take a breath. Let your body move with her movements. That is it. Much better." They started at a slow walk, leaving the stable yard and heading out into the open range. Xavier kept Thunder close to Daisy, talking Violet through the basics of riding, offering encouragement and correction in equal measure. Slowly, she began to relax, feeling the rhythm of the horse beneath her, understanding how to use her body to communicate with the animal. The ranch unfolded around them like a painting. Rolling hills covered in golden grass stretched to distant mountains, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Cattle dotted the landscape, red and white and black against the gold, and the air smelled of sage and dust and possibility. They rode past cowboys working the herds, and each man tipped his hat respectfully to Xavier and nodded politely to Violet. She noticed that Xavier knew them all by name, asking about their families and their work with genuine interest. "You care about them," Violet observed as they rode away from a group of men repairing fence line. "They are not just employees," Xavier replied. "They are men who work hard and deserve respect and fair treatment. Some of them have been with me since the beginning, when I had nothing to offer but promises and hard labor. I do not forget loyalty like that." They stopped on a high ridge that offered a view of the entire ranch, and Xavier pointed out the boundaries, the different sections where cattle were rotated through pastures, the water sources that were vital to the operation. "I have worked for 9 years to build this," he said, his voice full of quiet pride. "Every acre, every building, every head of cattle represents hours of labor and planning, but it is more than just a business to me. This land, this life, it is freedom. No one tells me what to do or how to live. I answer to no man but myself." Violet understood that hunger for independence. She had felt trapped for so long by poverty and circumstance and the weight of her father's failures. The idea of a life where she could make her own choices, where she could work toward something meaningful, was intoxicating. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "I can see why you love it." They rode for hours, stopping to eat lunch by a creek where cottonwood trees provided shade and the water ran clear over smooth stones. Xavier had brought sandwiches and apples, and they sat on the bank, letting the horses drink and graze while they talked. Violet found herself relaxing more with every passing hour, drawn to Xavier's easy manner and genuine nature. He asked her questions about her life, her thoughts, her dreams, and he listened to her answers with real attention, not the polite half-interest she was accustomed to from others. "What would you do if money were no object?" Xavier asked, tossing an apple core into the creek for the fish. "If you could have anything in the world, what would it be?" Violet thought about it, surprised by the question. "I think I would want a library. A whole room full of books that I could read whenever I wished. And a garden, a proper one with vegetables and flowers and fruit trees. And I would want to help people somehow. There are so many others like me, struggling and desperate. If I had the means, I would want to make their lives easier." Xavier studied her with an expression she could not quite read. "You do not wish for jewels or fine dresses or trips to fancy cities." "What would I do with jewels?" Violet asked, genuinely puzzled. "They do not fill your belly or warm your bones. And fancy dresses are just clothes that are harder to clean and mend. As for cities, I have seen Philadelphia, and I prefer the open sky and clean air out here." Something shifted in Xavier's expression, a softness that made him look almost vulnerable. "My sisters would think you were insane. They cannot understand why I choose to live out here instead of in San Francisco or Denver, where I could parade my wealth around. But you get it, do not you? You understand that there are more important things than impressing people who do not matter. I understand that survival teaches you what is truly valuable," Violet said. "And that once you have known real hunger, real cold, real fear, the things that once seemed important reveal themselves as foolish vanity." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Violet's muscles ached from the unaccustomed exercise, but it was a good ache, the kind that spoke of accomplishment rather than mere exhaustion. When they reached the stable, Xavier helped her down from Daisy, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "You did well today," he said, looking down at her with approval in his eyes. "Natural rider. With practice, you will be racing across these hills like you were born to it." The days that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Violet woke each morning to sunshine and the sounds of the ranch coming to life. She helped Rosa in the kitchen, learning to cook for large groups of hungry men. She tended to the garden behind the house, coaxing late vegetables from the cooling soil. And every afternoon, she rode out with Xavier, learning the land and the work, understanding the scope of what he had built. But it was the evenings she treasured most. After dinner, when the work was done and the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Xavier would take her to the parlor or out to the porch, and they would talk for hours. He told her stories of his early days in Idaho, of cattle drives and winter blizzards, and the constant struggle to build something lasting. She told him about her mother, about the books they had read together, about the dreams she had once held before poverty made dreaming seem like a foolish luxury. On the fifth night, as they sat on the porch watching lightning flicker in the distant mountains, Xavier asked the question that had been hovering between them. "Do you think you could be happy here, Violet? Truly happy, not just content or resigned, but actually happy?" Violet considered the question carefully. A week ago, she had been prepared to sacrifice herself for her father's sake, to enter a loveless marriage that would save him from ruin. But somewhere in the past 5 days, something had shifted. She looked forward to seeing Xavier each morning, felt her heart lift when he smiled at her, found herself thinking about him when they were apart. "I think I could," she said honestly. "I am happier here than I have been in years. The work is good, the land is beautiful, and you are kind to me." "Kind is a low bar," Xavier said with a slight laugh. "I should hope I am more than just kind." Violet turned to look at him, struck by the uncertainty in his voice. This man who commanded respect from every cowboy on his ranch, who had built an empire from nothing, was uncertain about her opinion of him. "You are patient and generous," she said softly. "You are honest and fair. You work harder than anyone else, even though you could hire others to do it for you. You treat everyone with respect, from Rosa to the newest cowboy. And you make me feel like I matter, like my thoughts and feelings are important. That is far more than just kind, Xavier." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. His palm was warm and calloused, and the touch sent tingles up her arm. "I want to kiss you," he said, his voice low and rough. "I have wanted to since the first moment I saw you standing in my hallway looking scared but determined, but I do not want to rush you or make you feel obligated." Violet's heart hammered in her chest. She had been kissed before, stolen moments with a boy back in Philadelphia before her world fell apart, but this felt different, important. "I want that too," she whispered. Xavier leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind to pull away. But Violet stayed still, her eyes fluttering closed as his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then it deepened, Xavier's free hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw. Violet felt warmth spread through her entire body, a sensation that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the man holding her. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Violet Harper. Not because your father needs the money or because my sisters tried to manipulate me. Marry me because I think we could be happy together, because I want to build a life with you, because in just 5 days, you have become the best part of my day." Tears sprang to Violet's eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, and Violet felt his heart racing as fast as her own. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, while the stars came out overhead and the night sounds of the ranch surrounded them. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Xavier sent word to Violet's father, inviting him to come stay at the ranch for the wedding. He also sent a terse telegram to his sisters, informing them of his engagement and making it clear they were not to interfere. When Catherine Pemberton showed up anyway, full of protests and objections, Xavier met her at the door and did not allow her past the porch. "This is my life and my choice," he told her firmly, loud enough that Violet could hear from inside the house. "Violet is going to be my wife, and you will treat her with respect or you will not be welcome in my home. Those are your options, Catherine. Choose wisely." Violet had never heard anyone speak so definitively to a family member before. Her father would have crumbled under such disapproval, would have bent to avoid conflict. But Xavier stood his ground, immovable as the mountains in the distance. And eventually Catherine left in a huff, her fine carriage raising dust as it rattled away down the road. When Samuel Harper arrived 3 days before the wedding, Violet hardly recognized him. Away from the oppressive weight of debt and failure, eating regular meals and sleeping in a comfortable bed, he seemed to gain life and color by the hour. Xavier welcomed him warmly, treating him not as a debtor or a burden but as an honored guest and soon to be family. He took Samuel on a tour of the ranch, explaining his methods and philosophy, and Violet saw her father's eyes light up with interest and respect. "He is a good man, your Xavier," her father told her the evening before the wedding. They sat in the parlor, just the two of them, and her father took her hands in his. "I am so sorry for what I asked of you, Violet. I know you came here out of duty and love for me, and I will regret that burden for the rest of my life. But I can see that you are happy, truly happy. That is worth more than all the gold in California. I am happy, Papa, Violet assured him. Xavier is everything I could have hoped for and more. He sees me, really sees me, not just as a solution to a problem but as a person with value and worth. And I think I am falling in love with him. Only think, her father asked with a knowing smile. Violet laughed softly. All right, I am falling in love with him, hopelessly, completely, and without reservation. The wedding took place on a perfect October afternoon in 1882, with the autumn sun warm and golden, and the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. They were married by the circuit preacher who traveled through Snake River once a month, standing on the porch of Xavier's ranch house with Rosa and Samuel, and a dozen ranch hands as witnesses. Violet wore a simple white dress that Rosa had helped her sew, and Xavier wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous and impossibly dear. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tenderness that Violet felt tears stream down her face. But these were tears of pure joy, of gratitude and love and the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The ranch hands cheered, and Rosa cried, and Samuel beamed with pride and relief. The celebration that followed was boisterous and heartfelt. Rosa had prepared a feast, and the men had strung lanterns around the yard, creating pools of warm light as the sun set. There was music and dancing, cowboys taking turns swinging Violet around while Xavier watched with an indulgent smile. But when the first waltz was called, Xavier claimed her immediately, pulling her into his arms and leading her in a dance across the makeshift floor. "Hello, Mrs. Landry," he murmured against her ear, and Violet shivered at the sound of her new name. "Hello, husband," she replied, testing out the word and finding it perfect. They danced until the stars came out, until the lanterns burned low and the cowboys began to drift off to their bunks. Finally, Xavier led Violet inside and up the stairs to his bedroom, which was now their bedroom. He had prepared it carefully, adding feminine touches like fresh flowers on the dresser and new curtains at the windows, small gestures that showed he had been thinking about her, planning for her presence in his life. At the door, he paused, suddenly uncertain. "We do not have to do anything tonight if you are not ready," he said quietly. "I know this has all happened quickly, and I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated." Violet reached up and cupped his face in her hands, struck again by this man's fundamental decency. "I am your wife, Xavier. I came to your room willingly, and I want this. I want you." The kiss that followed was different from their previous ones, deeper and more urgent, full of promise and desire. Xavier swept her up in his arms, carrying her across the threshold and setting her down gently beside the bed. What followed was tender and passionate, a joining that was both physical and emotional, a claiming and a giving that left them both breathless and complete. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the quilts, Violet's head resting on Xavier's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her back, and she could feel him smiling even though she could not see his face. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words simple and profound. "I know it has only been 2 weeks, but I love you, Violet Landry. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." Violet pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "I love you too. I did not think it was possible to feel this way, to be this happy. Thank you for seeing me, Xavier. Thank you for choosing me." "You were always worth choosing," he replied, pulling her closer. "My sisters thought they were being clever, but they gave me the greatest gift of my life. They sent the poorest girl thinking I would refuse, and instead, I found a woman richer than gold, worth more than this ranch or any amount of money. I found you." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and when Violet woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window, it took her a moment to remember that this was real, that she was truly married to Xavier Landry, that this life was now hers. She turned her head and found him already awake, watching her with such love in his eyes that it stole her breath. "Good morning, wife," he said with a slow smile. "Good morning, husband," she replied, and they both laughed at the newness of it, the joy of it. The days turned to weeks, and the weeks to months, and Violet settled into her new life with a contentment she had never thought possible. She learned to ride with confidence, racing across the hills on Daisy with her hair streaming behind her. She worked alongside Rosa in the kitchen, but also began to take on other responsibilities, managing the household accounts and corresponding with suppliers. She started a garden in earnest, planning for the spring when she would plant vegetables and flowers, creating beauty alongside utility. Xavier was true to every promise he had made. He cleared her father's debts and set Samuel up with a small house in Snake River and a job as a bookkeeper for the ranch, work that allowed him to rebuild his dignity and self-respect. He treated Violet as a true partner, consulting her on decisions about the ranch, valuing her opinions and ideas. And he loved her with a fierce devotion that never wavered, finding ways both big and small to show her how much she meant to him. Winter came hard that year, with snow piling high and temperatures dropping so low that the water in the basin froze solid overnight. But inside the ranch house, there was warmth and light and laughter. Violet spent her evenings reading aloud to Xavier from the growing collection of books he bought for her, everything from poetry to philosophy to novels that took them to distant lands. They played cards and chess, arguing good-naturedly over strategy. And when the nights grew coldest, they warmed each other in the big bed, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal dedication. By the time spring arrived in 1883, bringing with it the sweet smell of new grass and wildflowers, Violet had news that filled her with equal parts excitement and terror. She told Xavier one morning as they rode out to check on the new calves, the words tumbling out before she could lose her nerve. "I am going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Xavier pulled thunder to a stop, his eyes going wide. For a moment he just stared at her, and Violet felt a flutter of anxiety. Then a smile broke across his face, so bright and joyful that it was like watching the sun rise. He swung down from his horse and pulled her from Daisy's back, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are having a baby," he shouted to the empty hills, his voice echoing back from the distant mountains. "Violet, we are going to be parents. I am scared," she admitted when he set her down, keeping her hands clutched in his. "What if something goes wrong? What if I am not a good mother?" Xavier pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "You are going to be an amazing mother, and I will be right here with you through every moment. We will figure it out together, just like we figure everything else out." The pregnancy was easier than Violet had feared, though she tired more quickly and had to give up some of the harder work around the ranch. Xavier became even more protective, fussing over her in ways that were both endearing and sometimes exasperating. Rosa clucked over her like a mother hen, making sure she ate well and rested enough. And Samuel visited often, his eyes bright with anticipation at the thought of becoming a grandfather. On a cold November night, with snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, Violet went into labor. It was long and hard, hours of pain that left her exhausted and wondering if she would survive it. But Xavier never left her side, holding her hand and wiping her brow, whispering encouragement and love. And when the baby finally arrived in the early hours of the morning, A squalling, healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray-blue eyes. Violet felt such overwhelming love that she could not speak through her tears. "He is perfect," Xavier breathed, holding his son with a reverence that made Violet fall even more deeply in love with him. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, unable to agree on anything. But looking at her husband holding their son with such wonder and joy, Violet knew exactly what name was right. "Thomas," she said softly. "After your father's father, the one you told me about who was kind and taught you about integrity." Xavier's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas Samuel Landry," he said, including her father's name. "Yes, that is perfect." Baby Thomas thrived, growing strong and healthy through that winter and into the spring. He was a good-natured child, quick to smile and slow to fuss, and he wrapped everyone on the ranch around his tiny finger. The Cowboys competed to hold him, and Rosa spoiled him shamelessly. Samuel visited as often as weather allowed, marveling at his grandson and helping Violet navigate the challenges of new motherhood. The ranch continued to prosper. Xavier expanded his herd and bought more land, always consulting with Violet and taking her counsel seriously. She proved to have a head for business, seeing opportunities he sometimes missed and offering perspectives that improved their decisions. They became true partners in every sense, building not just a ranch but a life together. Years passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and the wide open spaces. When he was 3, Violet gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Violet's mother. She had her mother's brown hair and love of learning, and Xavier doted on her shamelessly. 2 years later came another son, James, who was quieter than his siblings but possessed a stubborn determination that reminded everyone of his father. Through it all, Xavier and Violet's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, as any couple does, but they faced them together with honesty and respect. They celebrated successes and weathered difficulties as partners. And every night, no matter how tired they were, they took time to sit together and talk, maintaining the connection that had first drawn them together. In the spring of 1889, 7 years after their wedding, Violet stood on the porch of their ranch house watching her children play in the yard. Thomas was 9 now, tall for his age and learning to work cattle alongside his father. Sarah was 6, her nose already buried in a book despite the beautiful weather. And James was 4, building elaborate structures out of sticks and mud with single-minded focus. Xavier came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "I am thinking about how different my life could have been," Violet replied, leaning into his embrace. 7 years ago, I came here expecting rejection and humiliation. I was the poorest girl they could find, sent as a tool in your sister's manipulation. I had nothing to offer you but poverty and rough hands and desperation. And I saw a woman of strength and character," Xavier said, turning her to face him. "I saw someone real and honest who had survived things that would have broken weaker people. I saw beauty that had nothing to do with fine clothes or social position. I saw you, Violet, and I knew you were exactly what I had been waiting for." Violet rose on her toes and kissed him, still thrilling at the way her heart raced when their lips met. "Your sisters meant to teach you a lesson, but instead they gave us both a gift. They sent the poorest girl thinking you would refuse, but you said I was richer than gold, and you were right. Not because of money or possessions, but because of what we have built together." "And what is that?" Xavier asked, though his smile said he already knew the answer. Violet gestured to the ranch spread out before them, to the house they had made a home, to the children playing in the yard, to the life they had created through love and partnership and unwavering commitment. "Everything," she said simply. "We have everything that matters." Xavier pulled her close, and they stood together watching their children, their land, their legacy. The poverty and desperation that had once defined Violet's existence were distant memories now, replaced by abundance and security. But more than that, they were replaced by love, deep and true and lasting, the kind of love that transformed everything it touched. Samuel lived another 10 years, long enough to see his grandchildren grow, and to know that his daughter was not just surviving but thriving. He passed peacefully in his sleep in 1893, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, a place where he could watch over the family he had inadvertently helped create through his desperation and hope. Xavier's sisters eventually accepted Violet, though it took Catherine 5 years and the other 2 nearly as long. They came to understand that their brother had not been fooled or trapped, but had instead chosen wisely, finding in Violet a partner who made him happier and more successful than any of their carefully vetted candidates could have. At family gatherings, they treated her with genuine warmth, and their children played with Thomas, Sarah, and James without any awareness of the prejudice that had once existed. The ranch continued to grow and prosper under Xavier and Violet's management. They became known throughout Idaho not just for their successful operation, but for their fair treatment of workers and their generosity to those struggling as Violet once had. They established a fund to help families pay off debts, remembering what it felt like to be crushed under obligations they could never meet. They hired people others overlooked, giving chances to those who had been written off by society. As Thomas approached his 18th birthday in 1895, preparing to take on more responsibility for the ranch, Xavier and Violet stood together on the same porch where they had first talked 13 years earlier. The house had been expanded over the years, but this spot remained unchanged, a monument to where their story had truly begun. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked, though his tone was light, teasing. "Marrying the rough cowboy instead of holding out for some city gentleman?" Violet laughed and swatted his arm playfully. "Never, not for a single moment. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a family, a purpose, and a love so deep it still takes my breath away." "You gave me the same," Xavier replied, his voice turning serious. "Before you, I had success and wealth, but I was alone. I did not even realize how alone until you walked into my hallway looking terrified and determined, and I saw what my life could be, what it should be." They kissed as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the same colors that had filled the sky on their wedding day. Their children were grown or growing, their ranch was secure, their love was unshakable. They had built something lasting, something good, something that would endure long after they were gone. In the years that followed, they became grandparents multiple times over. Thomas married a teacher from Boys and gave them 3 grandchildren. Sarah followed her mother's example and married a cowboy who worked on a neighboring ranch, surprising everyone with her practical choice and proving she had inherited her mother's ability to see true worth. James took after his father in temperament and skill, eventually becoming Xavier's right hand in managing the ranch operations. Xavier and Violet grew old together, their faces weathering with sun and time, their bodies slowing but their spirits remaining strong. They still rode out together when weather and health permitted, still sat on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. The love that had sparked between them so quickly in those first weeks never dimmed, but rather deepened with each passing year, tempered by shared experiences and mutual respect. On a summer evening in 1912, 30 years after their wedding, they sat together watching their grandchildren play in the same yard where their own children had played decades before. Xavier was 60 now, his hair gray and his face lined, but to Violet he was still the handsome cowboy who had looked past her poverty and seen her worth. Violet was 48, her hands still strong despite their age, her eyes still bright with intelligence and love. 30 years, Xavier said softly, taking her hand in his. 30 years since I made the best decision of my life. We were lucky, Violet replied, squeezing his fingers. So many things could have gone differently. If your sisters had not tried their manipulation, if you had sent me away like they expected, if I had been too proud or afraid to stay. It was not luck, Xavier corrected gently. It was choice. We chose each other again and again every day. That is what made the difference. Violet leaned her head on his shoulder, content in a way that came from a life well lived and love well given. They sent the poorest girl thinking you would refuse, she murmured, repeating the words that had become their private joke over the years. But you said I was richer than gold. And I was right, Xavier replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. Richer than all the gold in the world and worth more than anything I could ever achieve or acquire. You were my fortune, Violet Landry. You still are. They sat together as the stars came out, surrounded by the land they had worked and the family they had raised, holding hands and hearts, partners in every way that mattered. The poverty and desperation that had brought them together was nothing but a distant memory, replaced by abundance born not of money but of love, commitment, and the choice to see the value in each other that others had missed. It was a story that would be told for generations, passed down through the Landry family like a treasured heirloom. The story of how a desperate father, a manipulative sister, and a poor girl with nothing to her name had accidentally created one of the greatest love stories the Idaho Territory had ever known. The story of how Xavier Landry, the tough cowboy who built an empire, had found his greatest treasure not in land or cattle or wealth, but in the heart of a woman the world had dismissed as worthless. And it was a story with a simple truth at its center, one that Xavier and Violet lived every day of their long lives together, that real wealth has nothing to do with money, and everything to do with love, integrity, and the choice to value what truly matters. They had built a legacy not just of property and prosperity, but of love that endured, family that flourished, and a partnership that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. As they grew older still, their children and grandchildren caring for them as they had once cared for others, Xavier and Violet never forgot those first days. The fear and hope, the tentative conversations, the moment when everything changed. They had started as strangers brought together by circumstance, but they had become soulmates through choice and commitment, and an unwavering determination to build something beautiful together. Xavier passed away peacefully in 1918 at the age of 66, surrounded by his family, his hand clasped in Violet's. His last words were for her, a whispered declaration of love and gratitude for the 36 years they had shared. Violet held him as he took his final breath, her tears falling on his weathered face, her heart breaking even as she felt grateful for every moment they had been given. She lived another 7 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren, all of them products of the love she and Xavier had built. She told their story often, wanting every generation to understand that true value lies not in wealth or status, but in character and love and the courage to see beyond surface appearances. When Violet passed away in 1925 at the age of 61, she was laid to rest beside Xavier on the hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The gravestone was simple, bearing their names and dates and a single phrase that summed up their entire story: richer than gold. The ranch continued under the management of their children and grandchildren, prospering for decades more. But the true legacy of Xavier and Violet Landry was not measured in acres or cattle or money. It was measured in the love that had transformed two lives, in the family that grew from that love, in the lesson they taught everyone who knew them: that the poorest girl can indeed be richer than gold, if only someone has the wisdom to see her true value. And so their story ended, not with tragedy or loss, but with the quiet satisfaction of lives well lived, love deeply felt, and a partnership that had enriched everyone it touched. They had started with nothing but hope and honesty, and they had built everything that mattered. They had proved that love, real and true and committed, was worth more than all the wealth in the world. The ranch still stands today, passed down through generations of Landrys. Each one taught the story of their ancestors who had met under the most unlikely circumstances and created something beautiful from poverty and manipulation. And on summer evenings, if you stand on that same porch where it all began, you can almost hear the echo of two voices talking late into the night, building a future on foundations of honesty and respect and love that refuse to be limited by circumstance or expectation. They sent the poorest girl thinking he would refuse. He said she was richer than gold. And together, they proved that sometimes the greatest treasures come in the most unexpected packages, and that true wealth is measured not in what you have, but in who you love and how you live. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West of 1882, and its echoes continued long after both lovers had passed into legend, a reminder that love sees what others miss, and that the richest lives are those filled not with possessions, but with purpose, partnership, and a love that endures all things.